Hey Tapersoners, I hope you're sitting comfortably because I have over 9,000 pieces of Pokemon news for you, and we cover the new rules in greater detail. It seems that a few fortunate souls have managed to get their hands on copies of Pokemon X and Y early, and we've had a lot of news dropped right from the get-go. So firstly, let's cover my biggest complaint so we can get it out of the way. The starter stage 2s with the surprising exclusion of Chespin stage 2. So, starting with Greninja.
Why is he a ninja?
And yes, that is my biggest complaint about it. The design itself is good on its own, but Frog to Commander to Ninja? It's a whole fact that he became a ninja from nowhere, but it wasn't hinted at by the stage 1, other than the stage 1 was a tree frog, and I guess ninjas and trees are somehow comparable. It makes as much sense to me as it being a frog sloth or a frog monkey. I mean, at least they live in trees, like tree frogs. As I said, the design on its own is good, it's just ninjas are a thing, I guess. Now I'm done ranting about appearance, it's also been confirmed that Greninja is a water dark type Pokemon. Next we have Delphox, and this is the exact opposite argument of Greninja. We can see the witch motif very early on, but I don't have any enthusiasm for the physical design at all. I mean, compare this to Fennekin, an obvious fennec fox with an allusion to Foxfire, a Japanese myth. Then we have Brazen. It gives a strong fox aesthetic, it just became slightly humanoid and more developed. But then it becomes Delphox, and that sleek design is thrown out the window, to be replaced by huge ear hair, and yes, I know the hair was there before, but before the hair was an aesthetic. Now it's part of the design. It's too prominent to be considered aesthetic. I think the thing I dislike most about it is the fact that we know the Pokemon Company can do witches correctly, as is seen with Miss Magus. All I can say is they had the ball and they fumbled it in the last few yards. Delphox's type has been confirmed as Fire Psychic, and with that typing I'm going to guess that it will be a prevalent special attacker. And now on to the final starter, we have Chesnaught, a grass fighting type, and out of the three it's the one I prefer the appearance of. He's big, he's tough, and he seems to live up to his name, by appearing to be the most defensive out of the three starters. He really seems to have come out of his shell. Get it? Shell? Chestnut? Okay, moving on. Also revealed as being Carbink, a rock fairy type that's classified as the dual Pokemon. And we also have Diggersby, the evolved form of Bunnelby. Its costume seems to have reversed, plus its arms and ears seem to have fused, meaning that this Pokemon could become a real earful. We've also been shown the in-game sprite for Tyrant, and I have to say it's adorable. It seems that condensing it has taken the potential menace away and left it looking incredibly sweet and cuddly. But enough of that before I get too sappy. As we move on to the newest face in terror, the dragon to end all dragons. Goomy! Yes, this little fella is Goomy, our latest pure dragon type, and before anyone starts the argument, its eyes are the big green circles next to its mouth. And for proof, we have his evolved form, Sliggoo. While we're talking about adorable, Flabebe's evolution, Floette, has been found, and it's planning to beat Pokemon into submission with its flower. We've also received confirmation on Binacle and his evolution Barbaracle, and the general consensus around these two seems to be fairly positive. Unlike with Klefki, a mischievous Pokemon that likes to steal keys. And yes, it looks like a key. But no, the keys on the ring aren't a part of it. Klefki's stolen them. We've also been shown the evolution for Helioptile called Heliolisk, which can carry the ability Sandveil, which means that we now have an electric type that can survive in Sandstorm. Players have also found Thantump in the wild, which I'm going to guess is part of Orotor's line. And on the subject of spooky Pokemon, we also have Pumpkaboo. The Girls Magazine Chow has revealed some more evolved fairy Pokemon, these being the evolved forms of Swirlix, the whipped cream Pokemon, and Spritzy, the perfume Pokemon. We're yet to receive their localized names, but as soon as we do, I'll make sure to actually put that news out to you. And finally, we've been shown a second Mega Charizard. This time we have Mega Charizard X. taking on a much more draconian appearance and finally receiving a dragon typing. He looks much more intense and is constantly breathing blue flames, which is the only downside as the fire isn't dynamic in its in-game model, making him look like he's sporting a big blue mustache. That being said, I still love how much this guy rocks, and the fact that now Charizard can access an even bigger stab move pool. It also gains a boost from its attack stat when it Mega Evolves, and its ability becomes Tough Claws, which boosts the damage from physical attacks. Alongside Mega Charizard we have Mega Gengar, Mega Aerodactyl, and Mega Abomasnow, with there being a mention that Gengar's type will actually change from Ghost Poison to Ghost Psychic. Now that we've covered the news, let's look at the rules. I'll start with the smallest ruling first, the ruling about Juniper and Sycamore. Now I can perfectly understand where this ruling has come from. The rule of 4 is a constant in the game, and allowing 2 cards with the same effect to exist in the same deck would mean that you aren't playing with 4 of each, but effectively 8 of one. Now my first reaction to this was, why only 4 of one instead of 4 in combination of a 2, allowing for inventive observation of the card you're using. For example, say I ran 1 Sycamore and 3 Juniper, with 1 normal Juniper, 1 in Rev Hollow, and the 3rd in Full Art. Now at first glance that would appear to be me just wanting visual differentiation, and to a point, yes it is, but that differentiation can actually help me. If I start with 2 Junipers in hand and end my hand back, and then draw another Juniper, if I'm using different card arts I can instantly tell if I drew the same Juniper again, or whether I have 1 in hand and 2 in deck, because I have that visual cue. But the decision wasn't made from a player's standpoint, but an organizer's standpoint. It's a lot easier to point out errors on a deck list if you can say Sycamore and Juniper in the same deck, 1 has to come out, instead of having to check whether it's 3 Juniper and 2 Sycamore or not. And I know that seems minor, but it's better to ensure that deck checks can be done quickly and avoid minor mistakes than to have the controversy of when somebody wins a regionals with an illegal deck list because either the event was too big to check every deck, or somebody made an easy mistake. Now, another point I've seen made about the cards having identical effects is that some people think that Sycamore was a wasted card because we effectively already have it. Why not give it a different effect? And I think the simplest way to answer this is that Sycamore is the XY Juniper. Sure, they could reprint Juniper, but then she'd be legal in X and Y onwards, and Juniper isn't in X and Y. She's the black-white professor, and they wanted to keep her mechanic when black and white are completely removed from the format. But the biggest complaint here is the fact that the cards overlap. Nobody complained that they should reprint Professor Oak when Juniper was announced, and Professor Oak would be a supporter by modern standards. Don't believe me? Ask Bill. The same can be said about Mom's Kindness and Bill. They were the exact same card, and even though they were compared, they didn't overlap and nobody complained. But enough beating around the bush, let's move on to the next new rule, the coin toss. Now this has caused a bit of controversy, but I'm going to explain why it's been done, and hopefully it satisfies people. The coin toss has been changed so that you resolve who goes first before drawing your opening hand. Now this is one of 2 anti-donkey measures that they've taken this season. Deciding whether to go first or second before seeing your opening hand stops you from being able to generate advantage, depending on what hand you have. Rarely, and I mean rarely, you will start with a turn 2 hand, especially under the new rule that you can't attack turn 1, the second anti-donking measure. Seeing your hand before you decide to go first or second allows you to decide on whether you want to set up first or whether you want to put damage on the board before your opponent does. Both offer some kind of advantage as far as game state is concerned, but if you open up with a strong attacking hand then you're obviously going to opt to go second to apply some heavy early game pressure. Choosing before you see your hand, you don't know your options, and it all comes down to what type of deck you're playing. If you prefer the chance to set up, then you're going to go first as your preferred option. If you specialise in early game attacks, then you'll choose second. In effect, this combination of rules is just made to prevent you donking your opponent, or your opponent donking you. With that in mind, before I cover the final rule, there is a point that I feel players tend to miss when rulings like this land, and it's easy to understand why. As people, we think personally. We tend to think, how does this change affect me? Not, how does this change affect the game? And as I said, that's very easy to do. It's human nature at its finest. But the point to remember is the fact that If something hinders you, it most likely hinders everyone else. Don't know what to pick after the coin toss? Neither does your opponent. Can't attack turn 1? Neither can your opponent. Chance that catcher won't work for you. Same goes for your opponent. And that brings me to the final ruling. The errata on Pokemon Catcher. It now requires a coin toss to work, and surprisingly there has been a huge uproar about this. Pokemon Reversal preceded Catcher, and it wasn't a problem. Then they released Catcher, effectively removing the coin toss, and there's a huge uproar. So they put the coin toss back. Once again, an uproar. This ties in perfectly with the statement I made previously about personal thinking, and it goes both ways. When Catcher was announced, a lot of people had the complaint that my opponent can do this, or my opponent can do that. This time it's a case of I could miss a coin toss and my opponent would hit it. Both of these arguments can be countered by simply reversing the roles. You could hit heads and your opponent could miss. Just like how with Catcher, you could do this and that as well. These changes are universal, and Catcher's change might see the return of some variation into the game. How many cards were bad in the last format because Catcher existed? When was the last time you saw Reuniclus? A format with 180 hit point basics and damage swap wasn't a thing? That coin toss could make a lot of bench sitters a lot more viable. And in the name of consistency, people could stop playing 4 catchers, meaning the bench sitters are even safer than before. I for one welcome our new coin toss overlords. But I think that's all that really needs to be said. What do the top percent think? Let me know down below. And until next time, peace. I'm a fire in my laser. Bye.